Good evening, everyone. I'm Vasudevan, the cluster lead of the Finance and Economics cluster at Declared and Time Center for New Economic Studies. So we'll be having a roundtable debate that is in collaboration with the history cluster. I'm sorry. And the topic for discussion today, it is a really interesting topic. And the topic is economic contribution of India as the colony of the British Empire. So this is a topic, that must be discussed upon by the nation's youth. And we as the students of economics and history, I strongly feel that this is a topic upon which we can discuss a lot upon. So let us start the discussion, starting with the first question, and that is, how did the economic relationship between India and Britain change over the course of the British rule? And anyone can go first.
So can I go first?
Yes, House, please.
So I would broadly classify this economic relationship in three stages. When we look at the first stage, it's when the British are just coming to India. So as we know, they first came to our shores through embassies of commerce. They used to engage in a lot of trade with us. So I think the economic relationship between India and the British was just a lot of intensive trade in the beginning. And when the British started establishing the roots of their empire, I would say that's where the second stage starts. And that's where we see a lot of economic exploitation, some degree of coercion, where they are putting in policies and they are acting in ways which force us to buy British goods. And this was also during the advent of the Industrial Revolution in Britain at the time. Sorry, England, not Britain. And the third stage is, I think, at the peak of the British Empire, when we see a lot of labor exploitation. We see a lot of indentured laborers going to other British colonies and working over there. So, yeah, I think that's how I would put the economic relationship. This is, of course, just one narrative. There are many different ways to look at it.
Does anyone want to add more on this question? Anyone? Okay, then let's move to the next question. Thank you so much, Arus, for your points. And the answer to the second question, and the question is, to what extent did the economic policies of the British Raj contribute to the rise of Indian nationalism? So, anyone would like to go from the history cluster? Okay, and then I actually have my own points of view to share on this question. Speaking of the extent to which the economic policies of the British Raj, contributed to the Indian nationalism, I would definitely say pretty much yes. I know that it was only due to the exploitative policies of the British that actually helped us Indians to unite and revolt against the British. So their policies itself were crafted in such a way that they made sure that they exploited the Indians, and they got huge amount of profits. The I would actually, I think, to put it in this way, I would say that uh, Britishers literally sucked the blood of Indians, and they made sure that the pockets of the Britishers were full. So the oppressive policies of the British, they ensured that they oppressed the Indians, and even though they oppressed, it actually brought a sense of unity among Indians, and it is only because of the unity that actually led to the fight for freedom against the Britishers, and now we are we are free, and we have successfully celebrated our 75th Independence Day, and that was only due to the the fight against the British rule. So it actually helped us in such a way that it actually got us united, although it was more of an oppressive kind of an economic policy. Okay,
Uh,
great points.
do you want
Yeah,
me to add something to that?
yeah, please, Saraj, please.
Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, one of the first things like when we talk about like nationalism, I think Swadeshi movement is like one of the important things, because people came together to sort of create a economy which was more self-reliant, and they wanted to, of course, oppose the English goods and of course their policies, etc., and burn their goods and clothes and all of those things. So that was, of course, one of the things where their economic policies, of course, led us to sort of start using things which was manufactured locally here. But then, of course, Swadeshi movement had its successes and failures. But other than that, of course, like I think a lot of it also is about the back end work, like um, I I mean, the way Congress Party, it required a lot of funds to, of course, run the nationalist movement, and a lot of that came from industrialists who did not like the like the export duties and a lot of these policies of British. So they would lend their support to the nationalist movement, because if India gains independence, then they would get a lot of freedom to trade the whichever way they want. So I think these two things, yeah.
Yes, Ashita, please go ahead.
I'm so sorry if if my voice cuts, because I don't have a good network. But adding on to your point, Vasu, I think even when we look at the kind of nationalism we have built, and especially if we look at post-independence and the impact that even I would say British economic policies kind of left on an newly independent India, especially with the Congress rule, we saw a huge rise of license Raj. India was known as license Raj at that time, and this again, like it adds into the point of being insecure, almost to the point of, again, the kind of extremist and very exploitative economic policies introduced by the British during its colonizing rule here. It kind of also led to the several years of independent rule of the Congress. It led to a very insecure economic policy driven, and only towards the late 80s, like 1980s, then we see India going into actually, like, for like kind of becoming a little less stringent with their rules with licensing with industries, and then kind of take that step forward only when we were close to debt. So I just thought that was something prevalent as well.
Yeah, great points. Arush, do you want to add anything, Arush?
Yeah. So I think exploitative economic policies definitely did sort of contribute to Indian nationalism, but I don't think it did so in a scale that we think it did. So if we look at something like the permanent settlement policies or the Roy Pari Act that came into place, we see generally a more dispersed form of protest. We see, say, small communities protesting against the immediate successors, which were the landlords or whatever. I think Indian nationalism, so to say, only came when the British introduced policies that curbed personal liberty, because that's when you have an incentive to come together in a big group and fight. So one very good example I can think on top of my head is the peaceful protest in the Jallianwala Bagh that happened, which unfortunately um, was met with a massacre. But that peaceful protest, if we remember from our NCRT textbooks, was due to the Rowlatt Act that was passed, right? Now, so when we look at economic policies, I wouldn't say it gave rise to Indian nationalism. I think it did lead to some conflict. But Indian nationalism, I think, only came about only through very extreme policies that curb individual liberty.
Good points, Arush. Yes, Sonakshi.
Just adding on to curbing individual liberty, I feel a lot of the economic policies which the British implemented did not allow Indians to take part in a lot of heritage livelihoods. For example, our artifact industry, that was something which was completely destroyed by the British. They did not allow us to take part in such industries. Such industries were generationally passed on, and then that kind of really curbed their livelihood, and that really made Indians feel as if they weren't allowing to get spiritually connected, and that was very important because I feel that helped in defining what it was to be Indian. That helped in that really gave a base to our national movement. So I feel their economic policies, yes, when they did not allow us, as Arush said, we needed a larger picture. We needed a very very brutal policy, which kind of made us come together. And I feel when they weren't allowing us to take part in traditional industries or industries which were related to our religion, I think that really helped in creating or highlighting a definition of nationalism.
Yes, thank you so much for the points, actually. Okay, then let's move to the third question. During the course of the British rule itself, we have definitely seen the trends of industrialization. So that was more of a tactics that was undertaken by the British Empire just to make sure that they actually favored the British imports. So do you actually think that this move was ethical?
Can I go?
Yes, please.
The answer is very interesting because it depends very much on the definition of ethics which we are taking. And ethics is a very multidimensional word, so its meaning keeps changing on the basis of the decade, the century, the state you're living in, both nationally as well as internationally. So I think we could answer this question by placing the word ethics in two epochs of time. The first one is the 21st century, the century we are living in, and then the century where deindustrialization did take place. So if we place it in the 21st century, then we must remember that our organizing principle, both politically and economically, is democracy, is capitalism, is fundamental rights, because of which we have, I would say, a more libertarian definition of ethics. So we have things like the Competition Act in place. We have things like right to livelihood, like right to equality in place. So if we place what the British did in today's scenario, then yes, it would be considered very, very unethical. And to give a similar example to what happened is, it came in the news a few days ago that Google is being pulled up in the United States Supreme Court because Google Chrome is the defunction app in a lot of Apple phones and laptops, and they are being sued because of that. Because, well, people are saying this is violating our right to equality. You aren't providing us a fair economic ground to function on. So then in the 21st century, yes, what they did is extremely unethical. But if we go back a few centuries and then try to analyze the scenario, then we have to keep in mind that we were being shrouded by imperialism. We were not considered humans to begin with. The British did not consider us worthy of being imparted ethical policies. And therefore, the argument that they take in this scenario is, well, you know what? We were giving the savages, the subhumans, modernity. We were opening the floodgates to modernity. They're very proud of the fact that they introduced things like the telegram, like the railways to us. And this is still a narrative which persists in a lot of historical discussions and debates. So, and we must also keep in mind that when they deindustrialize us, it's not like they left us without a job. It's not like they didn't give Indians jobs to do. It's just that they pushed us towards industries like cotton and jute and more manufacturing and industrialized and machinery-based industries, which obviously did make us lose a lot of traditional industries, but they still did give us a job. And what they said is that, well, what we're doing is we're just helping you organize yourself in a more modern state, in a economy which will actually help you participate in the international sphere. So that is their argument. And if you consider the fact that they were an imperial government at that time, then they'd say, no, what we did was not unethical, rather it was very altruistic. So I think the answer to this question is it depends on the definition and the time that you are placing the word ethics in. And that's why it's a very interesting question to debate as historians and economists.
Great points, Amish. Great perspective of that. Yes, Amish.
Yeah, I think Sonakshi encapsulated what I wanted to say pretty well. I just wanted to emphasize on the fact that it's not very wise to import our definition or our understanding of what ethics is into a completely different period of time, because the sort of people who existed back then, the sort of values that they would follow were very different. So it doesn't make sense for us to sort of import our chain of thought into a completely different era. Now, that being said, understanding what ethics is seems to be a little challenging, at least for me. And I personally feel a lot of people um confuse unethical things with illegal things. That happens quite often. So if we are, I just came across this very interesting thing. I was reading up on the trial of Warren Hastings when he was about to be impeached, and it's very interesting to see that out of the 16 charges put against him, a lot of them were based on personal corruption. So, in a personal capacity, if you are sucking out money, it is apparently a crime and illegal and possibly unethical. But when you are doing it at a systemic level, apparently it's all good. So, that I thought that was very funny. And even if something like this was considered unethical back then, I think a lot of these powers would have overlooked it because colonialization, at least back then, was one of the few ways in which you could become a powerful entity in the global platform. And that is precisely why a lot of these European powers would venture out and try and colonize other territories.
Yes, Ashita.
Yeah, so I don't think I need to add much because I think my fellow members have added quite a bit. But I think what came into my mind is I remember, I think it was Churchill who said once that if Hitler won, would we think he was a bad man? It's as simple as that. I think if Hitler and that kind of extremist actually won, if they were able to control, would we actually think they were bad people? It's all set of narrative and the time. I'm not at all, saying what. I'm not saying Hitler's good, or like I'm not at all comparing the same, but I think it's very important to understand that this issue of the industrialization that happened wasn't something that was, quite frankly, not only observed in India. We saw this happen in other colonies that, US, I mean, not sorry, not US, the British government had like the other colonies in Southeast Asia. We see this being a very prevalent thing, especially the way that the British government operated their colonies were very similar. In fact, with laws and everything was very similar. So then it's very important to look at also the experiences of these of India, not just as India as being one of the colonies, but looking at as like several part of colonies, right? It's part of several colonies that British once had. So I think, like, Sonakshi brought up a really good point about, now it's very important to understand what ethics would have meant then. And I don't think, us, maybe it's just me as someone who's into history, but I don't think it would be really, great for us to now impart what ethic is now to something that happened over a century ago almost. So yeah, I mean, I was just thinking of that one thing. Yeah.
Yes, Arash, go ahead.
Yeah, while it completely makes sense, I agree with everyone when we talk about the subjectivity of history and how, of course, the subjectivity of ethics and how it evolves and what is considered now right wouldn't something that would be even discussing at one point of time in the past. But I also want to like kind of acknowledge the importance of the right, what is considered right and wrong, and what is considered ethical as something that that actually moves people into action. Because while we are now like discussing if the same stand of ethics were involved back then, but at the same time, I mean, if you read Franz Fanon and a lot of these authors actually writing from colonies, one of the most important aspect is that there is this feeling among the people from the colonies that of being wronged, right? And it is not coming from a very rational idea of what exactly would involve the industrialization and a lot of these things, but I just the idea of being wrong because they are pursuing some sort of traditional occupation which is now disrupted, and they did not see this sort of disruption at least kingdoms used to come and go, but like this sort of economic overthrowing of an entire system and disruption of trade and a lot of these things, that of course brings into question the difference in the very idea of ethics. Like, of course, ethics might mean something else for the British, but of course, there's also an ethics, the idea of ethics from the perspective of the colonized people, and yeah, I mean, of course, that would vary. And again, then if we go into like too much into like the specificities of it, then of course India had a very interesting economic setup based on caste. And I think some of the people who are lower caste wouldn't actually find a lot of things unethical about the British rule, who got actually say um, who got exit out of their traditional occupation of manual scavenging, or or the servile jobs, and then they got posted as soldiers, etc. So it's like it's also more about ethics as a it's so subjective that we can't really actually judge as an Indian population in itself completely.
Yes. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Great points raised by all of you. Now you spoke about every point in detail about this question. So although I would like to agree with all the points raised by you, I actually found one point that was raised by Sonakshi to be I actually not disagree with that. She actually said that now the British brought a huge amount of modernity. If we speak of trains and telegrams, so we have countries that have created marvelous, great infrastructure such as trains or even telegrams or modernity or even skyscrapers without being colonized. So the argument itself, saying that British brought modernity, they're saying that they brought trains and telegrams itself is a very very weak argument. So we have seen countries, that have there are mega structures and have been immensely successful, such as Dubai or UAE. I'm sorry, both are the same. UAE being hugely successful without being colonized. So that argument itself is weak. Other than that, I agree with all the points raised. Thank you so much. Okay, so moving to the fourth question of this debate, and that is something which is connected to the third question, and that is, did the colonial policies create a system of economic dependence on the British Empire as a whole?
Can I start
Yes.
with this one? And
yes,
yeah.
yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is pretty obvious that there was a system of dependence, and this system of dependence, of course, grew once the British policy shifted from mercantilism to meeting their requirements of industrial revolution. And of course, like they used to take raw materials and create finished product, and then colonized countries would also become the grounds for selling those finished products, so that as in the market, etc. And of course, those would be mass manufactured, so they would be cheaper than the traditional alternatives, which would not be viable for like a lot of families. And I mean, yeah, that is why there was also a need of Swadeshi movement at a particular point. But then I would want to particularly talk about this um, political economic theory of I mean, you must have heard about it, dependency theory by Underground de Frank. So yeah, what he talks about is basically that imagine the globe being divided into core countries which are like developed, and then peripheral countries in the peripheries which are like underdeveloped. Now he draws a difference between undeveloped and underdeveloped. He says that like these countries are not developed because they are being exploited, and so there is a dependence on the core countries of these underdeveloped countries. So yeah, of course, I think by that analysis we can
Yes.
imagine. Yeah.
Yes. Okay, so there's Arush, just a moment. So our meeting will be ending in 10 minutes. So please keep your points a bit crisp and concise. Yes, Arush.
Yeah, so I don't have much to add. I think Saransh gave a pretty good and well-rounded answer, but I also think there was this element of coercion which added to this economic dependency. A very good and compelling example is agriculture. Now, a farmer would want to grow rice and wheat or whatever else is profitable or sustainable on his land, but when a foreign power comes up and coerces you to uh, plant indigo instead, you don't really have a choice and you have to do something because where else do you get your money from? So apart from all the points raised by Saransh, I think coercion was also a very, very big tool used to sort of manufacture dependence on the Indians, so to say.
Yes. Okay, so moving on to the last question for this debate, and that is, now we have come to the the present, and that is, what are the lessons India must learn as a emerging superpower from the British rule? So anyone can go. Yes, Ashita.
Yeah, so I'll just start and keep it really crisp. But like Arush brought up the point in the previous question about the fact that when a farmer chooses to, like, if they wish to make something profitable, they were not allowed to. And that kind of brings back to now our contemporary time in India as an economy. Not wishing to bring in something very controversial, but I think it's very important to talk about is the farmers' issue that is going on right now. Now, I think this is something I think not a lot of people have seen, but I really observe this issue as in a very colonial mindset itself. There is a sort of colonial insecurity that India has taken, and obviously I don't think that is something that will take generations to get over. But I think that colonial insecurity comes in the sense of being very scared of losing the greater power, which is, let's say, like industries in this point of economy, looking at industries. So I think even in the sense of farmers issue, I think if, let's say, I mean, it's a very utopian thought, but then if, let's say, the way the government and the policies that we make around economic development has to be very centric to the kind of population that is there and the earning population of India, which is at the end of the day agriculture, and it's not industrialization, they are the top chains of it. But then we have to understand agriculture and indigenous practices are at the end of the day the grassroots economy, and we have to be more centric of that. And instead, I think because of this colonial insecurity we hold, if there is some sort of acknowledgement that this is our population, and policies, if it's centered, if we look at policy centered towards that, I think it would be better for us. Yeah, that's all I have to.
Yes. Thank you, Harshita. Yes, Sonakshi.
I think one thing the British were very good at was that they were able to find out the merit in what the people and what the geography of India had, and they exploited it to its fullest. Now, I'm obviously not advocating for our current government to exploit us and exploit our soil, but yes, the government should try to analyze and try to pick out where our talent lies and really try to invest in it and put proper research into it so that we can kind of increase our GDP and kind of fulfill our talent. And I think that is something that the government, now we do have the resources, we do have technology, we should probably harness technology to its fullest and really try to pick out these centers of talent and use it to become the Vishwa Guru. And yeah.
Yes. Thank you, Sonakshi.
Yeah,
Yes,
so yeah, I'll keep it real short. I know we're running out
yeah.
of time. The idea of India never really existed back then. The India that we know today was born very recently, and before that, it was just a collection of different kingdoms and communities together in the subcontinent. And that is one of the main reasons why the British could colonize our subcontinent so easily. This is the whole concept of divide and rule. You turn one against the other. But that is not the case today. We are a pretty big nation and we are subject to this almost the same set of laws everywhere, including the laws relating to the economy, laws relating to trade, etc. So I think the big takeaway for India as a whole nation is self-preservation. Um, don't pit against each other, don't hate each other. I think that's all, because that's what leads to a lot of destruction in the long run. If we are able to advocate for self-preservation as a country, which we are doing if we are looking at the anti-dumping policies that India is putting, which is a lot today when on other countries like China, Japan, Thailand, USA. I think it's a very good thing. We have to sort of give more time to our community and build an economy which is able to preserve itself and which is powerful enough to preserve itself and is not swayed so easily by foreign powers.
Yes, Anush, thank you. Like even according to me, even I have the pretty much the same points to say. We have come a long way, right from being the colony of the British, and now we are independent now. And at some point of time, even like before the Britishers ruled us, India, it actually contributed, if I'm not wrong, to the 25% of the world GDP. And right after the Britishers came, and we got reduced to 2%, if I'm not wrong. And we have been growing fastly. And there are many lessons, that we as a colony learned from that, and we must ensure that we should not repeat the mistakes. And as future policy holders, or the future government must ensure that they invest more on youth, and they focus more on economic development, and to ensure that we actually become this superpower very soon. Thank you so much, guys. Thank you so much for telling your points and sharing your views on the topic. Okay, so the debate ends. Thank you so much.